When we look at economic statistics, we tend to suffer from like the Jeff Bezos walks into a bar problem, which is like the old joke. Jeff Bezos walks into a bar, the average person's a billionaire. It doesn't tell you anything about anyone in the bar, right? And so we tend to do that with our economic statistics. So we pick these big aggregates and, GDP is growing at this rate or whatever. And yes, there are some people that benefit from that. But the truth is economic mobility has decreased significantly in the United States, right? 70 years ago, if you were born in the bottom 25th percentile of wealth, you had a 25% chance of dying in the top 25th percentile. Real economic mobility. Today, you have a 5% chance.
If you're a senior leader right now, you feel it. You have more data than ever, more dashboards, more AI tools, and more noise. And yet, decisions aren't getting easier. They're getting harder, heavier, with higher stakes consequences. That's why I wrote Artificial Organizations. Build better judgment, speed, and results by combining human and machine intelligence. This book is not about AI hype. It's not about replacing people. It's not about productivity hacks. It's about judgment. Over the past few years, I've spent hundreds of hours shoulder to shoulder with Fortune 500 CEOs, C-suite leaders and founders working on real problems under real pressure. Board decisions, strategic bets, talent shifts, even growth bets. Even AI rollouts that actually deliver results, because 95% of them don't. I've been using the same system myself inside our studio, building AI companies from scratch, and in my own leadership routines every single week. What we discovered is simple. AI doesn't transform companies, leaders do. And when you deliberately combine human instinct with machine intelligence, something powerful happens. Decision cycles shorten, trade-offs become clear, meetings turn into decision engines, and you get your headspace back. In this book, I show you how to design your own judgment system, how to turn meetings into digital assets, how to build executive workflows that give you time back to think deeply before making major decisions, and actually how to measure if AI is making you better or simply busier. This book is practical, it's hands-on first principles, built really from the trenches. If you want to lead with more clarity, more speed, and more confidence in the age of AI, this book is for you. You can get it at artificialorganizations.com. So let's go build better judgment together.
Enjoying the podcast? Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on YouTube. This way, you won't miss any episode and it greatly supports our podcast.
Today in the Unlearn Podcast, we're joined by Seth Levine, a builder of ecosystems, investor in founders, and thinker on the future of capitalism. Seth is a partner and co-founder of the Foundry Group, a Boulder-based VC that he helped start in 2006 that now manage billions on their assets, focused on backing early-stage tech. He's a passionate advocate for entrepreneurship and community, co-founder of the Pledge 1%, which mobilized nearly $3 billion in philanthropic commitments. Seth's writing and ideas stretch back traditional VC playbooks. He's the co-author of The New Builders, and his recent book, Capital Evolution, explores how today's economy can create broader opportunity, more ownership, and stronger communities. Questions right at the heart of what it means to unlearn the assumptions that have grounded businesses and capitalism for decades. Today, we'll dig into his journey, understanding what inspired him behind the book, how he is evolving the way he works, and what's ahead with the role of AI. It's a fascinating and fun conversation. Looking forward for you to listen. So Seth, welcome to the show.
Man, you've a super background. You've done so many interesting things, so good on you. And thanks again for being on the show and also writing about it. I think that's one of the best things about it. So yeah, Brad, basically, I suppose you listened to the show we did together about Give First, super show, super individual. Obviously, you and him have worked together for many years. I'm sure you've a great friendship and a great relationship and the companies that you've built together. But now, like you're also a writer as well. And what's always fascinating for me is writing in a way is a way to reflect on lessons learned, things that I've tried, hopefully maybe scale some of that knowledge to help other people. So for you then, what was that inspiration to write Capital Evolution? And you've done so many different things. What was the moment to say, right, I need to write this book and the core premise behind it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on to talk about this stuff. I could talk forever about it. I love it. And interestingly, and I've thought about this a little bit, and I've had some friends ask me, I've written 2 books now, And neither of them were the sort of like VC pontificate book, right? Here are my lessons learned from life, et cetera. And I actually think my next one is going to be sort of about that. It's going to be about my journey in productivity, because I've sort of broken myself and then reinvented like how to get my work done, basically, for lack of a better way of saying it, over the last 10 or 15 years. So maybe that's more like that. The two books I've written so far are like kind of heavy topics, deeply researched, right? We talked to about 100 people, academics, CEOs, people all the way down to the corporate hierarchy, all sorts of folks, people in the impact investing world, people in the non-impact investing world, to research Capital Evolution, the new book. And really the idea for the book came from, I mean, sort of the most innocuous of places. I was at a board dinner, and I happened to be the only out-of-town board member. That's only important because everyone else had left the board dinner. It was me and the management team. And we started chatting about just sort of the current political environment with respect to companies, and companies being asked to like talk about stuff. And we were, one of our other companies in the portfolio, the CEO had written something about the Dobbs decision, the decision that essentially moved abortion rights back to the states. And he'd gotten a lot of feedback from both people who thought he didn't go far enough and people who thought he went too far in what he said. And the CEO at dinner was saying basically, like, what's your advice? What should we do? And he asked me a very specific question. Would you accept a lower return in your fund for us living our values? And I thought it was, I mean, I gave him sort of a wishy-washy answer, but I thought it was actually a really interesting question.
Right
and
on,
it got me thinking. And it was one, you know, sometimes, Barry, when someone asks you a question and it sticks with you, right? A lot of times people ask you stuff and you're like, yeah, that's interesting, whatever. And then, 30 seconds later, you've forgotten it and you've moved on. This one, I didn't forget. I couldn't move on. I was waking up at night thinking like, wow, this is a really interesting question. So I called Elizabeth McBride, who I wrote my last book with, and I just said, hey, what do you think of this? And as Elizabeth, she's a journalist, so what she suggested is, why don't we talk to a couple people about this? That's a really interesting question. So we set up a couple interviews, talked to some folks, and that was kind of like, we kind of got red-pilled on it. Like we went down the rabbit hole, because it wasn't just a question of like, what's the role of companies in our society? It became a broader question of like, what's going on with capitalism, like with our economy right now? It turns out roughly half of the people under 40 don't think capitalism works, right? So there's that overlay. We thought we were sort of still in this like neoliberal shareholder first idea that Milton Friedman outlined like 50 years ago. But as we dug into it, like we're kind of not really in that mode of capitalism anymore. What we're in was super unclear. And, that piqued our interest. And we're like, great, let's write about not just what's going on with businesses and the power of business in our economy, but what's going on with capitalism more generally. And that's, that was the start of like a 2-year research journey that, eventually led us to writing Capital Evolution.
Yeah, no, I love these stories. From my own experience, I worked at a company called ThoughtWorks. It was founded by a guy called Roy Sigmund. Now, Roy was the most interesting character I'd come across in my career to date. He was really driven by values in the company. We had 3 values. We wanted to have a sustainable business, technology excellence, and social and economic justice. Those were the 3 values. And every time we had a new client come in the door, we challenged ourselves against those sort of values to say, right, do we want to work with this company? Will it align to the skills that we believe we have, allow us to have a sustainable company, but will it actually align with the corporate social justice values too as well? And it was one of the most fascinating sort of environments I'd ever been. Everything, there was no managers in the entire company. He eradicated them. Management, no one had a manager. My first day, I remember coming in and I was like, how do I book a holiday? And people are like, you just take one. I'm like, what do you mean I just take one? Who do I tell? He goes, you just tell your team you take a holiday. So it was this amazing system that he had built where we would turn down corporations that we feel weren't values aligned for work, but not necessarily just avant. We would have to challenge ourselves to say, look, if we turn down every client that walks in the door, we won't have a sustainable business. So we've got to find this balance. And it was actually inspired by the Ben & Jerry's founders. They came in and talked to us about how they started their company. And their sort of core values were this idea that they obviously wanted to remove hormones from food products, like the beginning of the sort of, I guess, the whole foods movement. So there was always these inspirations from a very sort of, I guess, formative part of my career about creating companies and letting people express themselves, but understanding that, you know, it's important to hold values, but it's also businesses exist, you know, to make a profit and be sustainable. Otherwise, none of us are eating, you know, at the end of the month. So tell us how, as you started to unpick this apart, what were, you know, some of the things maybe that surprised you most, and maybe surprised yourself about how you thought about the world when you started to dig into, you know, these interviews and researches, and maybe reflect on some of the businesses you've been part of over the years?
Yeah, first, let me start by just thanking you for sharing that story. I think it's really interesting. And the more we dug into it, the more we uncovered lots of stories like that. I think it's important to note that one company's set of values doesn't have to equal another company's, right? We have a chapter where we talk about Patagonia, Hobby Lobby, and Chick-fil-A, right? Very different sets of values, but all examples of values-driven organizations. And in a couple cases, specifically Hobby Lobby and Patagonia, where their values very clearly bled over into politics in a purposeful way. Now, they're both closely held corporations. That was their decision of sort of how they wanted to do that. But it does get to this distinction between values and politics. I'll talk about that in a second, because I do want to also say, I also think it's totally fine if a company wants to say, hey, we're going to serve whoever comes, and we exist to make as much profit as possible. And I actually think in some respects, it's a perversion of capitalism to pretend that everyone actually behaves that way, but a lot of companies don't quite behave that way. Like, I'd rather companies sort of say, look, these are the values that we have, and we're going to express those in terms of our business. We think they're best for our long-term goals. But if you don't share those values, great. Then don't be an investor in us, right? And some of those companies might say, look, we are going to push the limit on everything we can do because our goal is to make as much profit in the short to medium term for our shareholders. That's also fine. So I think it's important to say that, because I think sometimes you get into these conversations about sort of values-driven businesses and everyone assumes what you mean is all businesses should have either the values that I have, right, which is certainly not what I'm saying, or have some set of values that, you know, are triple bottom line or have something to do with something other than making money for shareholders. I think it's fine if there's companies that just say, look, this is what we're in business for. We're only going to look to shareholder value.
Right on, yeah. One of my favorite examples actually is Nikolai, the founder of Revolut, the sort of disruptor bank. And, you know, one of the famous sort of Slack messages he shared with the team is that their business was a performance culture. And what that meant is that if you were given your KPIs for the year, which might be increase retention by 20% on customers in a new market, if you didn't hit that KPI, you were on the potential to be fired and let go, because that was the culture that they were about, performance. It was measured on performance.
Yeah.
And it's not for anyone, I totally agree, to say this is right or this is wrong. It's actually truthful. It's being honest about, here's what we're about, here's what we expect of people and how we want to behave. And for me, I think that is one of the most transparent systems that you can have. Netflix have the same, where they, you know, get rid of the bottom 10% performers of their company every year. It's okay if that's your performance-based culture. And I think, as you're always alluding to, what's unfair is espousing one idea and then behaving in the opposite.
Absolutely.
And I think that's sort of, again, where you got to call BS on these companies. So, right, well, let's dig into some of the ones that stuck out to you then as you dive into it, because it's important.
Well, you know, I started talking about this distinction between values and politics, and I think you asked me, like, where did my thinking change? I actually, going into this project, felt like companies should be more strident about, like, their sort of like societal issues, right? And I think that, and sort of express an opinion about it. I had a 180-degree shift on that as I spent time talking with folks. Now, I think companies should express a set of values, whatever those values are, right? Glory to God is a value, right? Just in the same way that being great stewards of the environment is a value. By the way, those two are not juxtaposed to each other. But I was thinking of, you know, Hobby Lobby, and which is in there, that's their value, or a summary of their value, and Patagonia. But I do believe now, having spent some time really digging into it and thinking about it, that I don't think we want to live in a world where every company is sort of affiliated with its politics, right? And I think there's a interesting line between values and politics. I didn't totally believe it. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, talked to us a lot about this. And I was kind of pushing him on it because I didn't understand it. I didn't really believe it. I thought it was kind of corporate wishy-wash. But as he both defended it and then as we thought about it and then we heard about it from other people, I actually do feel like there's a distinction, right? And I think that distinction, and I think the challenge for corporate leaders, if they agree with this, is to not let that statement of values overtly end up being, well, then we must support whatever, these sets of policies that are either Republican or Democrat or whatever it is. Because I just don't really feel like that's the kind of world, at least that I want to live in. I would say that's something, Barry, that changed a lot in my thinking, right? I mean, I felt like we don't trust government. We don't really trust the media. Media is super fractured, and sort of what is media is hard to define now anyway. And so I guess that means companies, and we need CEOs to step up and, talk about what these values are. And I think that actually companies do themselves and society a disservice if they step too overtly in that. Now, you can have a set of values that includes equity or other things that you think are really important, and by the way, drive higher performance workplaces. Your workplace that you described had a set of values that led to a set of decisions that maybe in the short term gave some things up, but in the long term you think was better for the business. All of that is fine, but I don't want to go see a bunch of CEOs on Squawk Box every day talking about this bill and that bill and what should we do in Iran and what should we do about this tax thing or whatever it is, right? I just feel like it just gets to be too much, and maybe that's just fatigue of the last handful of years where everything's become overtly politicized, but I really think that that's important to say to people, right? And ultimately what we wrote about in this book is like a pretty middle of the road kind of prescription for capitalism. It's a bit of a defense of capitalism, right? We didn't write it thinking we would need to defend it that much, but it turns out, look, we just elected a socialist mayor in the financial capital of the world. So we're obviously having some dissonance about what kind of system we want, but we talk a lot, and I think that's just a symptom of too many people being left off the economic ladder, which is absolutely true. And we talk about the ways in which the last 50, 60 years of neoliberalism have failed to allow people en masse to prosper in the way that, by the way, they did between the end of the Second World War and the 1970s, right? And we tend to suffer when we look at economic statistics. We tend to suffer from like the Jeff Bezos walks into a bar problem, which is like the old joke. Jeff Bezos walks into a bar, the average person's a billionaire. It doesn't tell you anything about anyone in the bar, right? And so we tend to do that with our economic statistics. So we pick these big aggregates and, GDP is growing at this rate or whatever. And yes, there are some people that benefit from that. But the truth is economic mobility has decreased significantly in the United States, right? 70 years ago, if you were born in the bottom 25th percentile of wealth, you had a 25% chance of dying in the top 25th percentile. Real economic mobility. Today, you have a 5% chance, right? This is the first generation, the sort of people coming of age right now who are not expected to out-earn their parents. The average age of a first home buyer is 41. It's crazy to me. So then you overlay that on populism, however you want to describe that, on the left and on the right, and you start to understand why a bunch of people voted for someone who, like Trump, who said he's going to sort of fix all these things and he's listening to them, or someone like Mamdani who said, hey, here's a bunch of free stuff that I think you deserve, and you were not at fault here. And by the way, it's the reason that Mamdani and Trump actually got along pretty well when Mamdani went to visit Trump in the White House was, they have different prescriptions on how to go about this, and Trump certainly doesn't govern as a populist, even if he talks like one, but they talk about the same sorts of issues. And I think we need to recognize that, and the book is really a call for what's going on, right? So we've got some statistics and things like that in the book, but also a prescription for, a path, not the path, a path we could take forward.
The thing that strikes me there as well is the up and coming generations, right? Like, you and I, we've had a good run, we're going to be okay. But I think about the people who are in this totally different world now of half of them might even be sitting in university, half of them might even be sitting in high school, wondering there's a political environment that's disrupting the world. they're in the midst of a great technology environment that certainly I've never experienced the rate of change that we're experiencing now in this. And they're probably looking out, I'm Irish. Yesterday, the average house price in Ireland went over €500,000 for the first time. Wow. Right? Like, I think the average wage is like €32,000 a year. That's a great wage, by the way. That is a great wage for people in the country. So you're looking at like, 15, 18x just to get like in the game, right? On these things. So there's so much out there. I think my latest stat I saw was 32% of Gen Zs think that they cannot find a path forward in work because they'll, be automated out of it, or, the again, more of the FOMO maybe that comes from the AI narrative. But what did you start to discover as the book got into hands of people, especially this up and coming generation? What did you feel like some of the conversations you were having with these folks was?
We've had such great discussions. We've done a lot of in-person events. The last book came out and it was in the middle of COVID. So like so much of what we did was online. It was nice, but like we didn't get to go and have in-person events. And now we're having in-person events all the time, and number at colleges, right? So I'm in fact, on Wednesday, I'm going to the Colorado School of Mines to meet with a bunch of 200 students there to talk about this. And I love engaging with young people on this subject because they deeply care about it, but it really has driven home how afraid a lot of people are about sort of where the world is headed. And I think that there is so much more uncertainty today. And by the way, I have kids that are just coming of age, right? I've got a 22-year-old, a 21-year-old, and an 18-year-old, right? So they're thinking about this. In my case, the two who are in college went to college. My 18-year-old's still in high school, and I think will go to college. But like, there's just a lot of uncertainty, and that you and I didn't have to deal with. And the things that make us excited, right? I hope in the back half of this conversation we'll talk about how each of us is leveraging AI, and it's like this amazing thing, and it's all this warm chocolatey goodness for us. But that same thing is making it so much more unclear what the future looks like for sort of this next generation. And I think we should acknowledge that. And I think one of the things that we did, and I did some research on this as well, and this has been studied by psychologists, but humans in general do a very poor job of putting themselves in someone else's shoes. And I think one of the things that I really become more sensitive to through this process, having interviewed 100 people for this book, and it was fewer people for the last book, maybe 30 people for the last book, is just how different experiences shape people's outcomes. You told me you just got back from Japan. I just spent 2 weeks in the Middle East. Also another chance to like ask people questions about how they perceive the world around us. And I think I don't know that this is American affliction, although I certainly think Americans are very prone to this. We think of the world as one way, which is the way that we see it from over here. And that way is really different when you are, standing in Dubai and you are 100 kilometers from Iran, right, from the coast of Iran. And so you view the world differently. And I think it's taken me a little while to realize just how hard it is to sort of like get that layer off and start thinking about what the world looks like to other people. And that was really the gift to me from writing this book, was exactly that, right? Because it made me realize just how sort of narrow-minded in some cases I can be, and it forced me to open up my thinking to how other people view these different situations, whether that's from their perspective internationally or just their perspective of being in a different job, in a different age range, in a different socioeconomic range, et cetera.
Yeah, no, it's, and power to you to do it. I think, like you're saying, one of the best things for me is always putting myself in different parts of the world, because it forces that function of looking at it differently. As I was saying, I was in Japan the last 10 days. And, what the reason I was there is obviously my new book, Artificial Organizations, is just coming out. They're fascinated in that culture because they have to retrain aging workforce. And this is, again, quite a unique aspect for Japan, right? There is a strong culture where you join a company, you show loyalty to the company for 20 years, 30 years. You may stay there your entire career. And obviously the world changes, technology changes through that timeline. So they're forced with an aging population, declining birth rate, many people who are embedded in this sort of some people might feel is a very top-down culture, where if you're a younger person, you're not encouraged to speak up; it's to fall into line.
Yeah, very hierarchical.
And
yeah.
yet they need to reskill and capability upgrade this entire workforce, because you have folks that are into their 50s or 60s that need to work into their potentially 70s and understand how to leverage tools like AI to improve their capabilities. So this is the dichotomy really of what I was spending time with, some of the largest commercial banks, some of the largest actual builders. Just
give us a preview here, Barry. What were some of the takeaways then? Because I find
it was
absolutely fascinating.
It is absolutely fascinating, because there is an acceptance that there is no other option but to retrain and rebuild the people that they have that are in their current roles. So they're struggling to do that, right? The classic sort of beliefs that we all say is we get older, we get more comfortable, which uncomfortable is what we push away from, right? It's I stick to my routines, I stick to the things I know, right? So they're going through this motion of trying to get people comfortable with being uncomfortable again at what most people would consider the later stages of their career. So fascinating to see that. This top-down culture that, again, is a huge part of Japanese culture overall, right? The leader, you go into a meeting in Japan, you could be sitting in a room with 10 people, but the only person you're going to talk to is the most senior person in the room. They are going to speak for the group, which again, for many people, especially if you grow up in a design thinking or innovation type context where part of the experience is it doesn't matter if you're first day on the job or you've been here for 50 years, everyone's contributing ideas. Like it's a melting pot of information flowing around. That is not the case in Japan. Culturally, it's very uncomfortable for them to do that, right? So when you're sharing these examples or trying to get them to do exercises where you're like, okay, everybody put your idea up on the wall about how we could change the company. Silencio, like that. You're literally like, everyone looks to the CEO or whoever the senior person is, and then they will put the idea up there. So instead of having 10 brains working on paths forward, you're reliant on one and what they believe, and everyone falling in to execute behind that.
Yeah.
And then probably the thing I guess you and I are both very excited about at the moment is the technology spin on this. And without doubt, the Japanese are the best at continuous improvement on the planet. You give them an innovation that comes externally. They have such a craft and love for refinement and improvement. They're just going to make it better, right? They make cars. They killed that. I'm not even going to talk about robots, but it's all these things that they have such craft for things, right? A constant effort to improve it, but they struggle with the innovation part of that equation. And that's probably, again, the other challenge they keep saying is that we don't know how to come up with the ideas, but we're great at improving the ideas when we have them. So how do we build this sort of ability to come up with the ideas, and then we can leverage our sort of improvement piece? So for me, again, I just had a great time trying to get like executives from these massive construction companies to sit down and start experimenting, like talking to an LLM about, come up with some ideas about the challenges you're facing, and give yourself some feedback on how you could improve the way you've done that last strategy. And it was just like, it was so much fun. They were all laughing and smiling and enjoying it. But I still don't know on Monday when they went back to work, what happened that was different, and I think that's the challenge many people are facing at the moment as they sort of embrace these new technologies, this new behavior. Ultimately, like the technology it's not about the tools, it's really about how you shift your behavior as a leader.
Yeah. And learning to accept it. Like you said, we don't, as humans, do a great job of like embracing change, right? We like to sort of do the things the way that we've been doing them. And so, whether you're in your 50s or 60s, right, or you're in your 40s or 30s, I mean, there is, and I think AI has been so disruptive because the change has come so fast and the tools are so powerful. And the difference, I think, between people that are really leveraging them and not is so wide that I think it's become very scary. I saw Accenture just announce something essentially saying like they're going to stop promoting people that aren't using AI, right? And they're essentially saying, show us how you're using AI, leveraging AI. And I bet that was scary to a bunch of people because there's probably a lot of people at Accenture who are like, they're using ChatGPT as like a search tool essentially, or tell me about this, or, give me some more information about that, or summarize this document. All good stuff, but like very basic stuff who see something like that and they're like, how am I supposed to leverage AI? And I think we're just scratching the surfaces on what that looks like.
Yeah. I think my sort of infograph at the week was somebody shared this amazing infographic of like the population of the planet and how many people are actually using AI right now. So, population of the planet, 8 billion. At best, we have somewhere in the region of sort of 3.2 million people that are using it in a proper augmented way about how they work. That's it, right? So, but Anthropic and OpenAI and the marketing teams that run those businesses would have you believe that there's 8 billion people using these tools and you're late, you're behind, you're going to get fired. So I think...
and I assume this is in your book, but like the first thing I tell people, because people ask me all the time, especially when I'm in a more general group, like how do you use AI? The first thing I say is like, you're not using it wrong. Right? Like no one, like most of the people in the world are not using AI in the way that you read about. And then I have to explain how I'm using it, which is how a small slice of people are really using it. And by the way, I'm probably at the bottom end of that small slice of people that are really leveraging it. But I as I mentioned to you before we started recording, I kind of live in Claude Code now because I've been experimenting with using that. And I mean, specifically because I was really excited about Cowork. And I had been using, OpenAI's tools, but I'd created some databases, obviously projects like everyone has, but I was really excited about Cowork, but it was a pretty limited tool set. And then basically Brad, actually my partner Brad, was like, you just use Claude Code. Like it does more stuff because Cowork's just a wrapper on Claude Code, and get comfortable jumping back into a terminal shell. I mean, I'm old enough that that's actually how I learned how to use computers, was in a terminal window. And so, now I run my day from iTerm, and I'm in email and some other things as well, but I'm also spending a lot of time in Claude Code, just sort of instructing it to do things. And as I was telling you, I mean, the nice thing about iTerm is you can like have 4 is about my limit in terms of windows open, but I can have 4 different terminals open, and I can have Claude running in each of them, asking it to do a different thing. And so, the more I use it, the smarter it gets. It knows my voice. It writes emails and memos and all sorts of things really well. And every time I bump into something I don't know how to do, I just ask it, how do you do this? I want to do this thing. How do I do it? Doesn't always work, right? I hit some limitations. I use Superhuman for my email. There's a MCP there's a connection with Gmail, but there's not a separate connection with Superhuman. So like I couldn't have it do some things I wanted to do there, but close enough. And it can still draft things because if it drafts it in Gmail, it'll show up in Superhuman. So there's a subset of things I can't do, and there's a subset of things I can do. But in any event, that's like how I spend my days these days. It's pretty delightful, actually.
Yeah, and I think that, anybody listening to this show is just going to hear the energy from you sharing that, right? And I think what is exciting for people is that it's challenging their behavior about how they work, and it gives a sense of I'm growing, I'm learning something new, I'm getting better, and I think that is the most important part of all of this. One of the messages I share with the folks in Japan, just like you're exhibiting here yourself, is like growth has to be continuous. You have to be open to getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. That is the world that we're in. And that means maybe it's a new tool that you try. Maybe it's a new way that you approach to do a design thinking or ideation session, right? There's research that's coming out from Harvard that actually teams innovating on their own versus teams pairing with an AI to come up with ideas are 3 times more effective, right? So there's all of these interesting, new behaviors that we're starting to see happen when it's human plus machine equals better outcomes. Absolutely. And that's always been the way, right? From the time we picked up a piece of flint and started to the time we made fire, which allowed us to cook meat and our brains to grow at an exponential rate. All of these things have always been human plus machine. And so I think it's always just remembering this part. It's not like, the FOMO of the machines are here to take us over, and right. Your, Matrix reference of taking the red pill and then I wake up inside it and I'm actually just a battery for a machine. Like, this isn't necessarily how it ends, right? It's our ability to recognize the creativity will always come. Our job is to make decisions, judgments. That's what we are amazing at. We're great at creative, tough decisions, judgment. Machines are not great at that, but machines are great at processing information, storing it, gathering it, looking for patterns in it, but they're not good at making decisions, and so that is, the fun part of all of this for me anyway.
Something you just said, I just want to highlight, because I hadn't actually thought about it this way, but I think you're absolutely right about this point about like new things, and that's what's getting me so excited, right? And I feel like, I don't know, I've been a venture capitalist for 25 years. It gets a little boring, right? Like it's a little like the same stuff over and over again. And I mean, I sometimes joke where, CEOs sometimes occasionally brings me something that's like way off the wall. And they're like, I'm sorry to bother you. I'm like, I've not heard this before. This is incredibly exciting for me, right? Because 99% of the stuff that people bring to me, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, well, here's how we've dealt with this 5 times in the past, or 25 times or 250 times. And you're right. There's like being a little uncomfortable. Like I'm a little out of my depth because I'm not a programmer, but I'm trying to spend a lot of time in Claude Code. And I'm not using it to program. I'm using it it's like an operating system, not a programming thing for me. But I'm a little uncomfortable. I like maybe messing some things up. But I love that. And I think why I'm getting so excited about it is, and why I'm just excited to use these tools is it feels novel. Now, again, that's my view because I'm a 53-year-old guy who's already been successful, made plenty of money, will have had a successful life. And I can understand how and why that is much scarier when you are trying to figure out how do I get an entry, a toehold on the workforce when AI is doing sort of most of the entry-level tasks at most organizations. So I get that it's challenging, but I would also encourage people who listening to this, and already, if you're listening to this, you're already like in that top percent of like people that are really trying to lean into it, but like to really experiment hard with it and embrace both the excitement of it being new, but also just being a bit uncomfortable about it. And like there are times when I'm just like, I am totally lost. Now, the great thing about these tools is when you get lost, you ask the tool to help you find the path again, and it helps you find the path again. And then if it doesn't work, I've had this a couple of times where it gives me some command line code that I've never heard of, and I run it, and I get an error message, and I just go back into Claude and I'm like, hey, it gave me this error message. What did I do wrong? Or what did you do wrong? And then it gives me a new idea, and then I do that, and eventually we iterate and it gets it done, right? So, that stuff, like operating in that methodology, I think is how everyone should be working right now. It's really exciting.
Yeah, no, I think it's one of the most special capabilities of these tools. Because for all the listeners out there, Microsoft Word certainly didn't do that when I had a problem trying to make things work in it 5 years ago, never mind 10, and that, again, but the behaviors you're exhibiting here, I think, is what I think people need to just really understand, it's that ability, though, to just keep trying and to struggle and to realize I am outside my comfort zone here. So I'm going to fail. I'm going to make mistakes. It's going to feel awkward. It's not going to feel like the way I know how to do it the other way. It's actually going to be a struggle. And again, if you're open to pushing through that, and this is regardless of tenure or age or anything, the ability to just say, right, I am going to work with this machine to find the answers, to keep asking the questions, to keep pushing myself and the machine, in a way, to keep pushing me to get outside my comfort zone, to recognize the failure points, but then get better, right? And I always think that the best coaches, whether they're human or machine, is that they take you outside your comfort zone, because that's where all the growth is.
That's where adaptation happens, right?
Absolutely, right? And again, if you want to stay in your comfort zone, that is a deliberate choice. It's a choice you're making. But there are people who are not making that choice, and they are challenging themselves to improve. And then if you think about any market, whether it's a competitive business market or it's a talent market, you are responsible for staying relevant in that market. And your ability to experiment, to test, to learn, to grow, that's on you. If you want to have a great experience in that market, if you do that, you'll do well. But if you sort of opt out, if you sort of say, I'm not doing that, it's a deliberate choice that has consequences. You may be successful, but the probabilities are not working in your favor against the people who are working human plus machine to make these decisions.
Absolutely.
It's fascinating.
And by the way, I mean, you said this with the sort of like, flint and fire and all that examples, but people are using that. By the way, new technologies are always scary, right? When the car came out, the automobile came out, you used to have a flagger in front of it, waving, someone walking in front of the car, waving a red flag. Everyone was so scared of it, right? And now we take for granted that like cars are around and and by the way, we're going to get that way with self-driving cars, right? The first time you take a Waymo, if I'm sure probably most of the people listening to this have done it, but you remember that first time and you're like, whoa, okay. But by the third time or whatever, you're like on your phone, barely, oh, I guess we're here now. Okay, let me get out of the car, right? Like you start to get used to it, you get comfortable with it. And I think that's a little bit of the adaptation we're talking about with these sorts of tools. And we should recognize as a society, not everyone is going to get comfortable at the same pace, and that's okay.
Right on. So for you then, Seth, like you said, you've done a huge amount of work based on this dinner conversation that led to the book. You're spending a lot of time with people now, talking to them. Is there one thing that you would encourage people, just to think about or take away that you've taken from this experience so far?
Yeah, well, for starters, you should read the book, right? Everyone listening should go buy a copy. I'm sure we'll put it in the show notes, but because I think it's a really thought-provoking book, and it's written in a very accessible style. We've gotten a lot of really positive feedback. By the way, it became a national bestseller, right? So not just my word, right? People liked it, and it definitely struck a nerve with folks. I have really tried hard since starting to research this book, to put myself in the position to talk to people that don't necessarily have the same background that I do or the same views that I do, and ask them questions with the purpose of not changing their minds on anything, but just listening. Now, that's easy when I listen to a podcast because it's not two-way, and I have been listening to some podcasts by people that I just don't agree with, but I want to hear what they're saying because I think it's interesting. And it informs me. Sometimes it changes my view a little bit, or at least modifies it. Sometimes it strengthens my view and makes me think what I thought was exactly right. But also, and I kind of felt like this after my first book as well. My first book was about kind of Main Street businesses and the people that build them, and I spent a lot of time, going into businesses and just sort of being, talking to the people behind the counter, oftentimes the owner, and just asking them about their experiences. My wife's a small business owner and a real estate developer, and so I've got some personal history with that as well. But the idea of just opening myself up and talking to folks a bit more, and now I'm an extrovert. This comes naturally to me. I'm happy to go up to someone in a whatever setting, cocktail party, and just be like, hey, tell me about yourself. Like, what's your, what are you doing here? But I think the more that you, as a listener, can put yourself in those sorts of situations where you're talking to as many different types of people as possible, and just with the purpose of listening and not persuading, I think you become a better person, a better version of yourself. And it's something my wife and I encourage in our children. It's something that I want for my friends. It's something I want for myself, and I would encourage everyone to do that. And I really feel like for me, that was the gift of the book, was really realizing I'd kind of gotten away from that, and I was sort of in a bit more of an insular bubble, which I think we all are. And it naturally happens. We work with people that have similar socioeconomic backgrounds and other backgrounds, and it's just really interesting again, the travel really helps, right? I mean, you just spent 10 days in Japan. I spent 10 days in the Middle East. And it's really interesting to talk to people from a very, very different culture who have just different perspectives on, on the U.S., for example, and what's going on.
Love it. Well, Seth, look, great book, Capital Evolution. Folks, go out and grab yourself a copy. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for sharing this great arc of both what inspired you, to write the book, but your own personal experiences now as you're dealing with everything that's changing in the world. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Barry, this has been great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. If you found this episode useful, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please consider leaving a rating or a review as it helps others find our podcast. For more episode and details about the show, visit barryoreilly.com, and we'll see you on the next episode.